Yeah, so I'm going to share my testimony, and it really is a testimony from death to life in how I see it. So, yeah, from a young age, I noticed that I was like quite an introverted child, but very sensitive. My dad was a really good provider, an amazingly talented man as well. He had so many incredible giftings, which I think he passed on to me, or I sort of inherited those as well. My mum was a very loving person as well, very kind, caring mother. And yeah, so I went through my years, there was quite a few things in the relationship between my mum and my dad where I would pick up and be receptive to tensions going on between them. My dad had quite a lot of, I think, issues with self-control around anger, and so I would hear a lot of arguing and arguments between my parents quite often, and I'd internalize it a lot. I'd have a lot of emotional turmoil going on inside, but I didn't have an outlet to express it. I didn't have the emotional connections with my mother or my father to have an outlet to resolve those things. So over years I carried that, and probably I want to share as well, just my dad would discipline me in his anger sometimes, and I think that was a big part of this installation of fear. I had a lot of fear, and I had a lot of fear of those situations of being disciplined and anticipating the discipline. I think it actually contributed a lot to my later life development of perfectionism. I really was noticed it later in my life that I'd have a standard for myself that I could never seem to meet, and I think that relationship with my father, because of his own relationship with his father and the discipline that he went through in that way, I think that really affected me in my early years of life. In my early teenage years, these tensions that I saw between my mum and my dad and their anger, I noticed that there was exacerbations in that from my dad. And over a few years, eventually there was a situation actually that he was a skipper on a prawn trawler, and there was a major traumatic accident while he was out at sea. One of the huge nets with tons of catch fell on one of his crew members, and the emergency services, there was a delay in them being able to do the rescue. So he was under a huge amount of stress, and it actually triggered his first diagnosed manic episode. So he had a huge response from that experience and that stressful experience. But from that point, over the following years, there was clear cycles of very, very elevated highs and then extreme lows. In the mania episodes, his personality would just change so much, and it would just, at that time in my life, I didn't know what that illness was or what it entailed, so it was very confusing, and I was very confused about what was happening to him. My mum did her best to respond to it, to keep us safe, but we ended up having to put restraining orders on him periodically, and there was times where he would not be able to come and see us. But some of my most grieving moments are coming home from school and seeing him parked his car at the front, and just mourning, grieving, and just to get a glimpse of us for us as his children, So I knew he was going through a massive struggle, and I just felt hopeless that I could do anything about it as well. So these things really impacted me emotionally as well, and because I didn't have an outlet, it was just all kind of like churning and building up inside of me. Some years later, in my late teens, my mum was diagnosed with cancer, and so she was diagnosed with cancer, bowel cancer, and had surgery to treat the cancer, and I'm pretty sure chemotherapy as well. And so she went through this huge process as well, and it was very confronting to come to terms with her being diagnosed with cancer. And with this going on, my dad was also, the episodes of mania and depression were increasing more and more. So there was a lot of instability at that time of my life as well. There was a lot of tensions and even police interventions and these kinds of things. So there was some really traumatic experiences around there for me as well. A few years after my mum was diagnosed with bowel cancer and treated for bowel cancer, I remember clearly there was one evening where she was feeling really sick, and we thought she had the flu. She was throwing up, and so we didn't think much of it, but it continued, I think, that night, and she ended up having to go to emergency. And within a day or two, there was tests and investigation done, and they found fluid on her lungs. And so over the next few days, they ended up doing a biopsy on an area of her lungs, and they found that she had a terminal cancer. So within a few weeks from then, she was given her a diagnosis that she only had a few weeks to live potentially. So this was a huge shock for all of us, our whole family and myself. And my parents, even though I wasn't connected so much emotionally, they were like the rocks in my life still. I felt like they were the structure for my life, and it was extremely hard coming to terms with that diagnosis, and then going through the process of just being with her while she passed away. It was incredibly confronting, but there was also a disconnect. I didn't process any of it emotionally straight afterwards, and so there was a lot of layers of this emotion that was just building up more and more. About 6 months after my mum passed away, we had a restraining order on my dad at that time, so I hadn't seen him for probably about a year beforehand. And I was upstairs, and I remember my uncle coming up and sharing news that my father had just taken his life. So there was a huge, that period of my life, there was just so much disruption. And I also didn't really respond emotionally. I remember I did have some emotional response, but there wasn't a grieving process. So I knew that there was, or in reflection, I knew that there was still emotions within that whole experience for me. And I think grief can be an ongoing thing as well. The depression started probably from, I was 17 when I lost my parents, so it was pretty much straight after that I started to notice depression. I also was using alcohol, binge drinking at that time as well, sort of straight after, and just that age of my life, and I was just trying to, or I was just fitting in with the norm really of going out and drinking and trying to pursue women as well, and that actually became quite an addiction in my life as well. Fornication, or just pursuing relationships with women to try and fulfill a void in me. I was deeply hurt inside, and I was deeply depressed, and this was like an escape for me at that time. And also pornography became like a strong thing, or something in my life that had a big impact and influence. And only in retrospect can I can see the destructive nature of what that did in my life. And but I think that also opened a door as well to my sexuality, and it was something that really affected the way that I saw women and pursued women in the way that I did. And I can see that in retrospect, how destructive that was to my life. I think it created a lot of I think it contributed to a lot of my mental health issues actually, and actually exacerbated them a lot as well. So after my parents passed away, I did an apprenticeship, and during the apprenticeship I started having thoughts that I wanted to travel, and I had it on my mind at first to want to go to South America and Europe as well. As I got towards the end of my apprenticeship, I was planning it, and I just remember thinking, oh, I won't go to Europe, I'll just go to South America. And I didn't really even know what my draw was towards South America. It seemed like somewhere adventurous and completely different to Australia, so I had a desire to experience something really different. I also just wanted to add, I had this really big experience in my life that at the time I was framing it as a spiritual awakening, but it had a huge impact on me. It made me really question reality and what reality was, and it opened up my mind to there being so much more to life than how I was viewing and seeing life previously to that. So that was a really significant, impacting time of my life around that time when I had this experience. But I can also see that was like an opening where I started to explore spirituality a lot more. And I started buying different books on spirituality, and I started to research all different kinds of things. I remember buying books on psychedelics and being so fascinated about reading people's experiences of altering their consciousness. I started teaching myself how to lucid dream, out-of-body experiences. I did this out-of-body experience course, Reiki courses. I started using crystals. I bought these crystal pyramids that I had in my room, and so I can look back and see that there was this strong direction opening up to these different things in my life at that time as well. Eventually, when I did travel, I traveled just to South America and spent about 6 months there, and there I visited all these different ancient ruins, the Mayan ruins, different old sacred sites and these kinds of things. And at the time it was a curiosity and a fascination. But I can also look back and see that it also seemed like to be part of this influence of just not knowing why I had a curiosity about these things, but just looking back and just recognizing there was a real draw to this kind of thing, and I didn't even know why. Yeah, when I arrived back from South America from my travel, I was in a relationship with a woman that I met when I was traveling. We'd only spent a very brief amount of time together while I was traveling, but she ended up, or we ended up living together. She moved to Australia, and so this relationship never was built on a good foundation. And I went through a lot of depression even through that period of time, but the relationship ended up lasting about 4.5 years. And through that time, I was really still searching. A, there was a real sense of wanting to come to a resolve around why I was going through this depression and why it was so severe. And another significant part of this time in my life was I adopted an extreme diet as well. I was following fruitarianism, which is pretty much just eating fruit. Yeah, so shortly after I moved up to Far North Queensland, the community that I'd connected with and found this sense of a new beginning with, I heard that there was more of this community out in a remote sort of area in the rainforest, and it really appealed to me because they were growing their own food, they were growing their own fruit trees. It almost seemed like an idealistic life to me at the time. So I went out to this property and spent some time there. And during my time there, there was use of, or the people in this community were using psychedelic plants and hallucinogens. I'd never taken anything like that at the time. I had interest and curiosity about those things, but I still had a reservation to steer clear from those things. But I noticed that there was an influence somehow, and I just felt a sensitivity to even them being around people using them, and also the environments that they were being used in. It was a tangible sense. I just knew that it was affecting me in some way. Yeah, so over a period of some weeks, I started having these hallucinations, and I would try to get to sleep, but I'd just start noticing things in my vision, and then eventually over some days it got to a point where I actually wasn't falling asleep but just hallucinating through the whole night, and I was awake the whole night as well. And also there was exacerbations in other areas where I stopped having an appetite to eat, so I stopped eating. And I also, over a couple of days, stopped drinking water as well. It kind of just became a secondary thing. And all of this exacerbated what I was already going through, and it led into this peak experience within this few weeks. I think it ended up being about a month in total. And in this peak experience, I actually ended up in a situation where I got myself lost in the area that I was staying in. I was beside a road, but I just got completely disorientated because I was hallucinating, and it was at night time as well. And then from those hallucinations, a completely different reality manifested within this experience. So now I was having a hallucination of a completely different reality to the one that I was actually in physical reality. And there was a strong, extremely strong theme to this state of being and state of mind. And within this hallucination and mental state, I was convinced that I was stuck in eternity in this experience. And I was convinced that it was never going to end. And it was just completely oppressive, the most dark and hopeless experience and state of mind that I could have ever imagined. I can't even really put words to how traumatic that experience was in my life. I still, even when I have spoken about it and speak about it, it just, there's words don't describe that state of being, of the mind trying to comprehend eternity, really. And so in this hopelessness, in this state, it lasted the whole night. So it was about 12 hours, this experience. And eventually I was found in the early dusk, in the early morning hours. Someone actually came up to me, and I couldn't recognize if I was still hallucinating or if it was an actual person. But eventually, when he started speaking to me, I recognized that it was an actual person, and he actually grounded me back into a sense of reality and what was actually going on. So there was a huge trauma now, and I think the biggest trauma really of my life, the biggest PTSD experience of my life. I couldn't really comprehend what I'd just gone through, and I didn't know how to explain it to anyone. I didn't think anyone could really relate to me in this experience. But not long after this, I went back to where I was staying in the city, away from this remote area. And I almost straight away, someone came into my life that had started up, which I didn't realize at the time, but in looking back, I completely see that it was a cult. And so I entered into this cult. I was at my most vulnerable, and I had the thought that maybe this person had come into my life to help me and to bring me into some stability and bring me into this community that we could take care of each other. And we went to another remote block of land in a different area. And so now I was living in this cult with all this alternative ideology, and they were encouraging a lot of damaging suggestions into how I live my life, and their morals and their ethics were very different from the morals and ethics that I had previously. But I just got drawn into all of the ideology that they were sharing. So eventually, I was in that cult for about 4 years, but eventually my conscience kicked in somehow. I just couldn't live under these values that this cult was like living under and agreeing to. So I disconnected from the cult, and that was a massive experience. It was my security again. I'd found that new sense of security, but I had to let it go again. And it was that time, also around that time, I addressed some of my deficiencies, and I was really deficient in B12 from long-term fruitarianism. And I'm sure a lot of other a lot of other vitamins, minerals and nutrients that I wasn't getting enough of that had contributed to the previous experience. So I ended up, in my search for what was my direction and meaning and purpose, I decided to do a massage course. And part of the massage course there was a training component, and I had to exchange massage with another person. And this person was interested in connecting with people that were doing shamanic psychedelic ceremonies. So there was a bit of a seed that was planted through making this connection with this person. And because of my past and the curiosity and interest in psychedelics, I thought earlier in my life, at some point in my life, I want to experiment with psychedelics. I want to have these experiences that I'm reading about. I didn't give much thought, but then another person that was in this greater community I was connected to also made a suggestion about psychedelics, and they made the suggestion kind of questioning when I shared with them what I was going through. They suggested, why not try something safe like psychedelics or something along those lines. So it sort of opened my mind up to thinking maybe this was actually something that could help me. And because there's so much in the culture at the moment around psychedelics and mental health, I was open to experimenting with this. So my thoughts were, I want to do this in a really safe way. I want to do it with people that have experience and know how to deal with situations around these things. And so this person who introduced me to the psychedelic ceremonies put me in contact with this group, and I ended up doing a shamanic psychedelic ceremony with this group. And it was a really full-on experience. I didn't even know really what to expect, but I was just really open to it. I thought, this is really going to heal me and potentially heal my mind. And these people, I thought, these people know exactly what they're doing, so I just put my trust in them. So yeah, these ceremonies, they're very intentional. It was 10 days and there was all different disciplines involved in it. There was, because I'd never experienced anything like it before, and I put my trust in these people. So I thought, if I'm going to do it with anyone, these are the safest people to do it with, and I thought to myself that this is a safe container to do it in. Yeah, my experience there though was, there was so much opening spiritually. The thought that came to me recently when I was thinking about it was, or the image that came to me, vision, was like a fishing lure, like a bright, shiny fishing lure just dangling, and me being vulnerable and not knowing what I was even going after. It was like I was chasing that, and it was the visions and the intensity of the visions and what I was seeing and everything that was coming through, taking these plants and having this this experience with these incantations. They were singing these incantations into me, and it was having this deep, profound effect. So there was such a it was it was a profound experience, and it really was like chasing a lure. It was just fascinating, and it really sparked and intrigued my curiosity so much. So after I did this group shamanic ceremony, I ended up seeking out my own solo psychedelic journeys. So I started doing psychedelics by myself. I was still under the impression that only to do the natural kind, so I wasn't doing synthetic psychedelics or hallucinogens, but I thought that because they're from nature, they must be safe, and they must be able to heal me, because that's what I thought. So I went out to these remote areas and I was taking psychedelic mushrooms, and each time I would do it, I would feel this prompt. It was almost like this influence of it was telling me to do more, that I needed to do more to get my healing, that I just needed to do more and a higher dose. So I was going from just taking higher and higher doses and closer together, and each experience kind of gave me the impression like it was a level up every time. I thought, I'm getting closer to that goal of healing. Somehow that healing is going to come if I just continue. Other thing I'll mention is a few years leading up to this decision to do the psychedelics, I was starting to myself experience what seemed like to me like hypomanic, kind of like hypomanic episodes really, and then very extreme depression. So I had a deep fear that what happened to my dad was going to happen to me, and I couldn't see an escape outside of trying something, or just continuing to try something till I resolved this issue. And so I just continued to seek. That's why I eventually ended up taking psychedelics, because I thought I'd come to the final straw. Psychedelics really, for me, turning to them was feeling like my last resort. I didn't think there was any other way, and this was, to me, it was like my final straw. I had to try something. And so I was taking them closer and closer together in higher doses. I ended up at that time getting in a relationship with a woman who was also into these kinds of things, psychedelics, and she was into goddess worship, which was something that I was also connecting to. I was sort of wrapped up in the lust of that whole scene. It was part of the community, the greater community that I was connected with. So my mentality at that time as well, the way I related to nature, was very much connected to this person's perceptions as well. I would relate to the earth as Gaia and this living mother being, and nature spirits and all these kinds of things. So there was all these associations that I had at this time as well. But we ended up in this relationship, and it was very intense, and it was a short relationship, but we opened up with each other in intimacy very quickly. And then my nana, I heard news that my nana was about to pass away. And it was around this time also the last psychedelic uh, experience that I had, or the last trip that I took, I climbed up this huge tree, and I was way up in this tree and just so in another world at this point. Everything had just got so exacerbated, and my thinking and my rationale, I felt so influenced by the whatever I was taking, that it was giving me impulses to make such irrational decisions as well. And so I climbed up this tree, and I took these psychedelics, and I actually mixed two psychedelics that one of them I'd never had before, and then I mixed them together. So it was this cocktail that I'd never experienced up in this huge tree. And I was going into trances and just in such a vulnerable, dangerous situation, but I couldn't identify it. Somehow I managed to climb down and actually not fall out of the tree or harm myself, but I got down. And then, as I was saying, my nana, finding out the news that my nana was just about to pass away, and then eventually passing away, it brought some reality back into what was actually going on. It triggered something in me that was actually real, and the grief of that actually brought me back somehow in some way. And that disrupted the relationship that I was having with this person, and they ended up making a disconnection from me. I had this very strong emotional connection that I'd opened up to, and I thought I had this fantasy or idea that this was going to be someone, or the person that I was going to spend my life with, even though I'd spent barely any time with her. And so there was so much delusion going on at the same time as well. But she ended the relationship, and it just threw me completely. I was in this huge elated high of all the neurochemistry, and it pushed me into like a mania kind of state. And then that disconnect, I went from up here just to drop, and it was that fall was the greatest fall. It was so immense, that state of being that I entered, and the mental state that I entered into. And now it was like everything that I connected with, it was like all the doors were open, but it was just torment, and it was constant torment. It was like, I felt like I was in another place, as if I was in hell, but I was still alive. And I was just ongoing torment for weeks, and then months, and I would sleep 1.5 hours a night, maybe a bit more, but I was getting so little sleep, and over months and months and months, it was just creating more and more and more stress in my body, and more and more and more. Everything about my mental state and my physical state was degenerating. I was extremely vulnerable, and I was convinced that, I'd come to a point where the torment was so intense and strong, and my brain had been affected so much. All the light, everything that I was seeing looked different. It was more intense and vivid, and it was as if I was still sort of on the psychedelics, but it was ongoing. So it was just so extreme. It was like having my eyes open was just complete overload, overwhelm. During that time as well, I ended up just having to come to terms with that. I was convinced that eventually I was going to die, like my body couldn't deal with it. I'd made a commitment to myself that I couldn't take my life because of what my dad did, and I would never want to, I just couldn't put my family through that. But it was so extreme that I remember writing out parts of my will. I started writing out a will just to help with, if that were to happen or when that was going to happen, that it would take some pressure off. And so I was going through this over and over, day and night. Every time I would wake up from that little bit of sleep, it was torment again. I would distract myself with, I could barely watch it, but I'd put things on YouTube and just kind of stare at it and just have some distraction through that. One day when I had a video on YouTube, in the suggestions came up a video, and it was a testimony video, and it said in the title, New Age to Jesus. And when I saw the video, the initial response was mocking, kind of like, what's Jesus going to do? I grew up in a Catholic background and went to a Catholic school, and the way I related to Christianity and Jesus was like a bizarre, strange concept that was almost like we have to get with the times. So I had this response, and it was like a mocking thing. But for some reason I clicked on the video, and after I clicked on the video, I started listening, but I went to the comments, and I was actually somehow, for some reason, I was drawn to the comments, and I started reading, and I read this comment. It was about maybe only 5 paragraphs long, but it was a testimony someone had left, how they'd been involved in a very similar or almost exactly the same sounding kind of thing with the shamanic plant medicine ceremonies. But they, if I recall correctly, they somehow there was a vision that they had, or an intervention where Jesus came to them in the experience, and the whole nature of what they were doing was revealed to them, that it was actually a deception, and that it was all demonic, that it was all created as a big facade through demonic influences. And when I read this testimony, all these dots started connecting, and I started thinking, because I hadn't even thought about this before, that maybe everything I'd done was just another big deception. And so it was like all these alarm bells started going off, and I really was in shock, and I started thinking about it more and more. What have I just done? Maybe this is what's happened to me. But there was so much resistance at the same time. It was like there was a war going on in my own psyche. There was things saying, there was almost like the two voices saying that Jesus is a deception. This is another deception. He's been deceived. He's been deceived. So it was there was a warfare going on. And yeah, but I somehow, there was still something drawing me into that. And what I ended up doing, I clicked on this person's profile, and they'd uploaded one video And the one video was their own testimony in extended length, like I'm recording right now. And it was a testimony explaining what they'd written in their written testimony in detail. They went into great detail, and I just related to pretty much everything that they had shared. And I didn't even know what to think at that time. It was just such a, yeah, I was just coming to terms with everything that had just happened, and it really was making me confront everything up to that point in my life. I ended up going on another comment, and he'd left his email address, so I emailed him, and I think it was within maybe even a day that he got back to me, and then asked and suggested maybe that we get on a Skype call together. So I ended up doing that. I ended up going ahead with it, and I got on a Skype call with him shortly after. And I was so desperate, so vulnerable, just to connect with someone that had been through or could have some understanding of what I was going through. It was that little bit of relief and hope meant so much to me at that point in time. Yeah, I just am so grateful for that. And he, on the call, I opened up and I shared about what I'd gone through, and straight away he gave me this clear kind of understanding, or helped me with my understanding. And he quite boldly shared with me that he thought the best thing to do, or what have I got to lose in just making a commitment and giving, or just going through baptism and giving myself to the Lord. And so I had so much conflict. We got off that conversation, and I just was in this turmoil of this warfare in my mind of it kept coming so strong that this was another deception, and if I did this, it was going to put me in an even worse situation. It was going to make it even worse. And then the other part of it was, maybe this is my way out, maybe this is freedom. And there was this intense war going on. So over about a month, I ended up finding a local church and a pastor, and I spoke to the pastor, and I told him that I was wanting to go through baptism and if he'd be open to that. And after some time, I went to that church and met him and spent some time just speaking a bit about my past and why I wanted to go ahead with it. And so yeah, about maybe close to a month around that after I connected with this person and he'd given me that suggestion about baptism, I made a booking to go through with baptism. And there was the weeks leading up to that, there was back and forward about this conflict of go ahead with it, don't go ahead with it, no I can't, and I would almost book in and then I wouldn't do it, and finally got to this point where I booked it. And so it was about a week away, and then I remember so clearly, because I would, at this point, my outing for the whole day would just be this very short walk. And I remember I went for this walk that I usually do, and as I was walking, I felt like there was something in my brain, or it was so intense. It was just this intense feeling. I can't even really explain it, but it was a feeling of a warfare going on in my spirit, so intensified. And and it just got more and more intense, and it was the days leading up to this booking of this baptism, and it actually stimulated this thought of, why is that happening? Why am I having this increase now? And if anything, it sort of encouraged me to go ahead with it. So I ended up going ahead with the baptism, and I went through water baptism. This person that had been ministering to me sort of gave me a sense of hope in a way, that when he went through baptism, that everything, there was a big shift in his life, like he felt a release from that. But when I went through it, I didn't notice anything obvious change or shift. So there was a bit of a sense of a disappointment in a way of, maybe this actually isn't going to help me. But I had a mustard seed of faith. That's what I really can see looking back. When I got baptized, I think I even said to myself, Jesus, I don't even know if you can help me. It was pretty much saying, I'm in this desperate situation, and if you can help me, please help me, Jesus. I'm giving my life to you. So it was out of absolute desperation. So as I would do these little circuit walks near my house, I saw this shop one day. It sort of caught my attention, and I went and looked in the window. At first I thought it was a New Age shop. I looked in the window and there was Christian books on the bookshelf. So I got the number. They were on school holidays, and then came back and found out it was a prayer ministry. So I started going to this prayer ministry, and they had a room where you would sit before you went and had prayer. And there was something about the first time I went in that room and was sitting in that room, there was, I wouldn't call it, or it was a sense of, some sense of protection, or I just felt, I was still feeling so much distress, but there was some sense of a little glimpse of peace in it. And so every time it was open just a couple of times a week, but I would go there every time it was open just to sit in the room, and then I would have prayer. Yeah, shortly after receiving this ministry from this prayer, the prayer ministry, most nights I would only be getting maybe an hour or 2 hours of sleep at the most at this point. Yeah, so I remember when I woke up in the early hours, and then I managed to fall asleep this particular night again. And I recall this dream really vividly and clearly. In the dream, I was standing on my front lawn at the house that I used to live at back in South Australia, where I used to live. And as I was standing on the back lawn, it was completely pitch black, and there was no one else around. I remember this sense that there was a peace about it, or there was a quiet about it. And I was looking up in the sky, and I could see this glow, and it looked like, I recognized that it looked like a moon, like a full moon behind the clouds. And as I was looking at it, the clouds started to part. So as I was staring, the clouds parted, and then I was just looking at this bright, vivid full moon. And as soon as the clouds were parted and I saw it, in the dream, I actually fell backwards. So I was standing up and I fell backwards. But in the process of falling, I became instantaneously aware that I was dreaming, like complete lucidity instantaneously. And I've had lucid dreams in the past where it's been similar to that, but this was so instant to know that this is exactly where I was. I was dreaming. I knew I was dreaming. I knew I was looking at this moon. And as I was falling, I fell back with all of this come to my awareness. And I'm lying on my back, completely conscious and lucid. And I hear this clear voice, and it says, "Blessed are those who pray in the night. Blessed are those who pray in the night." And then boom, instantaneously I'm awake now. So it went from that to just wakefulness. And straight away because I've been reading the word or starting to get into the word more, I knew this was God's way of speaking to me and giving me instruction. And there was so much, just that moment, I just remember waking up and that was like a point of contact, of reassurance, and it just brought something that I hadn't experienced before. There was relief in it. And so I started to, the same things, I would wake up at that 3 a.m. and then I would start praying. Or I started beginning to develop a routine of prayer at that time in the night. And then I think it was some weeks later, I had another dream. And then in this dream, there was 2 buildings going through like a walkway, 2 buildings on each side. And it was a very bright day, and it reminded me of somewhere I'd actually been in South America with large cobblestones, so the whole environment was very clear. And I was walking through, and I could see there was someone in front of me, but they were naked, and they were riding a tiny little circus bicycle. So this whole thing was just, why is this? And another thing, I identified, or something about it, I just saw, that looks exactly like my cousin. And so I'm thinking in the dream, I wasn't lucid at this point, but I remember thinking, why is Josh riding this circus bicycle naked through this? So I started pursuing him. I walked through this gap, and it opened up into this square, into like a city center. And I remember the light glimmering off, it was like sandstone, very particular color and really bright and vivid. And the person that I thought was Josh now was about maybe 20 meters in front of me and slightly elevated up on a block. And I was looking at him, and now his whole body had transformed, and now it was a man that had broad shoulders, almost like a big, broad-shouldered man. And he had no shirt on, but he had shorts. And then this is when a very similar thing as the last dream happened, but this time my awareness got grabbed. It was like full lucidity, from dreaming to complete lucidity instantaneously. And at the same time, my vision got planted on this tattoo on his lower back. And so all my vision is just on this tattoo, and the tattoo is all this interlocking patterns. And straight away, I recognize that this patterning is connected to the shamanic ceremonies that I just recently participated in. They looked the same as the textile patterns. And so as soon as I made that connection to that's what that's connected to, and that's what that is connected to, my attention and awareness got pulled away from that and planted on the top tattoo. The upper back tattoo was covering almost the whole back, and it was a demon, so clear, so vivid. But the first thing I recognized was that part of the tattoo on its head was missing. So it was like part of the tattoo wasn't complete, and then part of the body had an area missing that wasn't complete, like it hadn't been finished being tattooed. And straight away, it was like God speaking to me so clearly, saying, this is how far into that demonic territory and the demonic realm, and how connected I'd become, and the work of the enemy in my life had been almost completed. That's like the message that I got from just seeing that, and what was spoken to me through it. And as soon as I identified that, every edge of every line of this tattoo, this intense radiant light started permeating from every edge. Like it was, only thing I can compare it to is in the Matrix movie, the Mr. Smith, I think, when he's breaking apart, I think in one of the end, and he's looking at himself, like the light is just breaking him apart. And it was, yeah, that's the closest thing, resemblance that I could compare it to. But so every edge all at once starting to emanate this light. And then from that it gets more and more intense, and then just, it's like this wave just goes over me. And I start experiencing this intense torment, as if when I was having the attacks in the night, it was the exact same disorientation and just full on feeling just like I'm being ripped apart, torn apart in my psyche. And that lasts maybe for a few seconds, and then it sort of comes to a bit, and I look down, and my feet are on the edge of a rectangular pool of water, and I just start falling forward. And it was same in the other dream that I just spoke about before, where I fell back. It was like it wasn't initiated by me, I just surrendered to it. And so I started falling forward and just surrendered to allowing myself to fall. And I went into the water and went under the water. And initially, because this whole experience felt like it was literally happening, and there was a panic that happened in me when I went under the water. I had this fear response, and it wasn't a voice this time, but it was a sense in myself to just surrender and let go. So I just made this, I just surrendered to the experience. And so I'm under the water, and then almost straight away I start to feel, and it happened over such a short amount of time, but this waves of peace, or this wave of peace just came into my body and like all through me. And it was just like everything that I'd just gone through for the last, I think it was almost 8 months at that point, that from that massive crash, through all the torment, then this peace just flowed. It was like the opposite of everything I just experienced. And it only lasted maybe a second, and then boom, I woke up. But that feeling was like instilled in me through just that 1 second of peace. It was worth everything to me at that point in time. And it was just, God spoke to me through that experience so powerfully. And it gave me so much hope. It was like knowing that God is actually working and in my life. And that experience just brought that into such a visceral reality for me, going through everything I just went through. That God is real. It was like I was I had that mustard seed of faith, and I was doing my best to water it, to get it to grow, or to support its growth. And then God gave me that experience and gave me so much reassurance in that moment. And then the days following that, so I was only, like I was saying, I was only sleeping 1 to 2 hours max or something like that, or very little sleep. And then a few days later, after this experience happened, I noticed I had maybe 2.5 hours sleep. And then a day or two later, I had 3 or 4 hours sleep. So there was this exponential release from the torment, and my body was starting to actually get into a pattern where I could actually sleep more. And then within a couple of weeks, I think I was sleeping the whole night. So there was this, it was like a deliverance had happened in the spirit through that experience I went through whatever that, it, to me, the way I looked at it was like a baptism in the way, but also a deliverance at the same time. And so yeah, that has, since that point in time, there's that torment that I was going through hasn't returned in that way. I've still gone through some attacks. I just have grown so much in the Lord and in relationship with the Lord since then, and I've gained so much more understanding of the warfare that is actually going on, and the reality of that warfare. Yeah, so since this time I connected in with a fellowship group, and shortly after that I actually made connections with someone who was doing discipleship training as well. And it's such a key area of my life and my growth in the Lord at this point in time as well, of sharing the gospel and following the word as the word is written. So there's many things and many areas that I'm growing in the Lord in this time, in these last close to 2 years now. And I'm just in awe of, from where I was, as I mentioned in the beginning of the testimony, I really can see so clearly now that I passed from death to life. Everything that I was doing in the past, that I was trying to seek truth through and trying to find the truth, eventually led me to the truth, which is Jesus. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And I'm just lifting up his name right now. Everything that he has done for me, everything that he is doing in my life. The born again experience is just the beginning, really. I see my baptism as just the beginning of a walk with Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, that he is the one that is taking me and leading me and guiding me. And as I become more and more obedient to his will in my life, I'm being led into paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yeah, I just want to finish by reading some verses from 1 John chapter 4. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is of God, and every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. And this is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you have heard was coming and is now already in the world. Just want to pray now. It's been a big thing to share my testimony, and I want to pray for all of those who have listened to my testimony. I pray that through my testimony something is ministered to you, and I pray that anyone in struggles or difficulties or in conflict about who Jesus is, I pray that this testimony would speak to you, speak to your heart like the Lord has spoken to me and is speaking to me, and that brought me here to share this testimony, to share the place that I was in, the darkness that I was in, and how He brought me into the light, into His kingdom, from darkness into light, into new life. And I just praise Him and thank Him and exalt His holy name, name above all names, Lord of lords, King of kings, who loves us with everlasting love and who just wants us reconciled back to Himself as our children, the one who created us. So I just pray, Lord, I pray that you say in your word that you go after the one who is lost. So I pray, Lord, if whoever's listening to or watching this testimony, that, Lord, you would seek after them, that you would continue to pursue them and to bring them into your kingdom of life and to establish them in relationship with you that leads into eternity, in eternal life with you, our Heavenly Father. And I pray these things in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.